Missouri, 2004. In the quiet heart of Brookdale, a small town surrounded by endless farmland, a young teacher's life was brutally cut short, and for nearly 2 decades, her killer remained a ghost. This is the story of the investigation that refused to die and the shocking arrest that shattered a community's peace. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every case deserves to be remembered, because what investigators uncovered, no one saw coming. Brookdale, Missouri, a town of church bells, cornfields, and winding streets where everyone seemed to know each other's names. It was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked and a missed Sunday service drew polite concern. In the heart of this close-knit community lived 27-year-old Emily Carter, a second-grade teacher whose warmth seemed to reach every corner of town. Her students adored her, parents trusted her, and colleagues often said her classroom was the happiest room in the school. Every morning, Emily arrived early, her arms full of lesson plans and handmade crafts. She loved teaching about nature, sometimes leading her students outside to draw flowers or trace the patterns of clouds. Her desk was cluttered with notes, thank you cards, and hand-drawn hearts that read "Best Teacher Ever." After the last bell, she often stayed behind, cleaning brushes, grading papers, or humming softly to herself. Outside school, Emily lived in a small white bungalow on Maple Street with her golden retriever, Daisy. Her life was simple, structured, and filled with purpose. She volunteered at the library on weekends, helped organize school fundraisers, and spent evenings cooking dinner for her parents, who lived just a few miles away. To everyone around her, Emily represented the best of Brookdale kind, dependable, and endlessly giving. But those closest to her noticed subtle changes that winter before the tragedy. Emily had recently ended a relationship with a local contractor named Daniel Hayes. Friends said she never spoke poorly of him, but she had grown quieter, more cautious. She began locking her doors twice, leaving the porch light on longer than usual. When asked about it, she would laugh it off, just being careful, she'd say, yet her eyes often lingered on passing cars a second too long. Her mother later recalled that Emily seemed restless. She'd been talking about taking a summer road trip, something she rarely did, as though she was trying to distance herself from something unspoken. Her father brushed it off as post-breakup fatigue. No one imagined those quiet shifts would later take on a haunting significance. Brookdale in 2004 was the picture of safety. The biggest stories in the local paper were about high school football games and crop festivals. People left their windows open in spring, and children played until sunset without fear. But in small towns, peace often hides fragility. One sudden act can fracture it forever. That April, Emily was planning her class's spring showcase, a project where students would present what they'd learned about Missouri wildlife. Parents said she was especially cheerful that week. She bought new art supplies, baked cupcakes for her students, and told her mother she'd stop by for dinner on Saturday evening. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet beneath the surface, unease lingered. She had mentioned to a colleague that she felt like someone's been watching me, though she quickly changed the subject when pressed. It was a fleeting remark that no one thought to report, at least not until it was too late. The Friday before she vanished, she stayed late at school, organizing binders and lesson plans. Security footage showed her locking the classroom door at 6:42 p.m. and waving good night to the janitor. That was the last ordinary evening she would ever have. In hindsight, there were moments barely noticeable that painted a subtle warning. Her cautious glances, her new habit of keeping her blinds drawn, the faint tremor in her voice when she said goodbye. On the surface, Emily Carter's life was peaceful and pure, a reflection of everything good about small-town America. But in the quiet corners of her days, shadows were beginning to form. And then came a night she didn't show up for dinner. Her parents waited by the window, plates growing cold, the phone silent. Outside, the wind rustled through the lilacs that lined Maple Street, unaware that Brookdale's innocence was about to shatter forever. What could have happened to someone so loved, so rooted in her community? April 17th, 2004, a warm Missouri Saturday, when the scent of lilacs drifted through the air and the streets of Brookdale hummed with spring life. Families mowed lawns, children played in sprinklers, and no one could have guessed that the peace of this small town was about to fracture forever. That morning, Emily Carter woke early. She called her mother around 9 a.m., confirming dinner plans for that evening. Her voice was cheerful, steady. She promised to bring her father's favorite dessert from the bakery downtown. Around noon, she stopped by the school to drop off extra supplies for Monday's class. Surveillance cameras captured her leaving just after 2 p.m., carrying a reusable tote and a bouquet of tulips gifted by one of her students. From there, Emily's movements were ordinary, heartbreakingly so. At 3:52 p.m., grocery store footage showed her smiling as she selected flowers and a bottle of peach tea. She chatted with the cashier, waved to a former student's mother in line, and walked out into the sunlight. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. By 6 p.m., her phone went unanswered. Calls from her parents rolled to voicemail, unusual for Emily, who never ignored family. By 7:30, her father drove past her house on Maple Street. Her silver sedan sat in the driveway, driver's door closed, engine off. The porch light glowed faintly in the dusk. He assumed she had stepped out to walk Daisy, her dog, and drove home. At 9 p.m., worry turned to dread. When Emily still hadn't arrived for dinner, her parents drove back to the house. What they found sent a chill through them both. The car was exactly as before, doors locked, keys still dangling from the ignition. Her purse and phone lay neatly on the passenger seat. Daisy barked from inside, frantic. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no broken glass, just silence. Police arrived within 30 minutes. Officers knocked, called her name, then forced entry. Inside, the home looked undisturbed. Dinner plates rested in the sink, a cup of tea half finished on the counter, her work bag propped by the door. The clock ticked softly, its steady rhythm mocking the chaos forming in their hearts. The initial search began immediately. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual. One neighbor mentioned hearing a sharp sound around 6:15, like a car door slamming hard. She said, but no one saw anyone leave the property. Another resident recalled spotting a dark pickup truck idling a few houses down earlier that day. Police made note, but without a plate number, the lead went nowhere. By midnight, the search expanded. Flashlights cut through wooded trails and open fields. Volunteers joined officers, and Daisy was turned over to Emily's parents. The night air grew heavy with fear and disbelief. At dawn, Brookdale awoke to the unfamiliar sound of helicopter rotors circling overhead. Local news crews arrived, broadcasting the words that would grip the town for months. Beloved teacher missing. Students gathered outside the school gates, clutching handmade posters with her photo, their small faces etched with confusion and worry. Detectives tried to stay optimistic. Perhaps she had left willingly to escape, to clear her head. But deep down, every officer sensed it. Something was terribly wrong. Her car, her house, her dog, everything pointed to a disappearance that made no sense. By Sunday morning, police dogs traced her scent only as far as the edge of the driveway before it vanished. No trail, no struggle, no sign of where she went. The people of Brookdale began locking their doors for the first time in years. Fear rippled through the town like an unseen current. What could have happened in those few short steps between her car and her front door, and who was the last person to see Emily Carter alive? 3 days after Emily Carter's disappearance, Brookdale's peaceful rhythm broke under the weight of dread. Flyers with her smiling face lined telephone poles. Search teams combed through fields, and the once quiet woods surrounding the town were alive with the sounds of boots and dogs. The community clung to hope, but by the third morning, even optimism had begun to fade. At 6:47 a.m. on April 20th, a local jogger named Lisa Monroe took her usual route along the old quarry trail, a narrow path just outside town that wound through thick brush and pine. She would later tell investigators she noticed something odd, a patch of disturbed soil near a ravine, branches arranged in an unnatural pattern, almost like a hurried attempt to conceal something. Curious but uneasy, she stepped closer. The smell hit her first. Then, a glimpse of fabric beneath the dirt's soft blue. the color of Emily's favorite spring sweater. Lisa ran screaming toward the main road, flagging down a passing truck. Within minutes, deputies from the Brookdale Sheriff's Department arrived and taped off the area. The moment the first shovel hit the ground, the case changed from a missing person to a murder. The body was found in a shallow grave, covered with leaves, branches, and a thin layer of soil. Emily Carter's remains were identified almost immediately. There was no mistaking her golden hair. The silver bracelet engraved Teach, Love, Inspire, still resting on her wrist. Her belongings, car keys, purse, jewelry were missing, but detectives quickly realized it wasn't a robbery. Nothing about the scene suggested theft. It suggested control. Forensic teams arrived within hours. They photographed every inch, collected soil samples, fibers, and even tree bark. The site was methodical, the work of someone who knew the terrain, perhaps a local. Detectives noted faint tire impressions on the nearby dirt road, too incomplete for a full match, but consistent with a truck or SUV. Footprints, partial and overlapping, told them at least one person had dragged the body to its final resting place. It was both violent and deliberate. The medical examiner later confirmed blunt force trauma to the head, along with defensive wounds on Emily's hands. She had fought hard. That fact struck investigators and family alike. The kind, soft-spoken teacher had faced her killer until the very end. When the news broke, Brookdale fell silent. Parents pulled children from school, and the elementary, where Emily taught, became a gathering place for grief. Her classroom door was covered in flowers, candles, and handwritten notes from students. "We miss you, Miss Carter." At night, vigils lit up the main street, hundreds of candles flickering against the darkness. A small town mourning one of its own. Detectives faced immense pressure. Reporters from St. Louis and Kansas City swarmed the area, calling it the Missouri teacher murder. Police Chief Harold Price promised justice on live television, vowing, "We will not rest until Emily's killer is caught." But behind closed doors, the reality was grim. Evidence was thin. The partial DNA collected from beneath her fingernails was too degraded to produce a clear profile. No weapon was found. The fibers on her clothing matched nothing in existing databases. Every lead evaporated within days. Detectives interviewed dozens of townspeople, former students' parents, neighbors, co-workers, even her ex-boyfriend Daniel Hayes. No one stood out. Everyone had theories, but no one had answers. And without answers, fear metastasized. In the weeks that followed, Brookdale changed. People installed deadbolts, carried flashlights at night, and eyed strangers with suspicion. Emily's murder was more than a crime. It was a rupture in their collective trust, a wound that wouldn't heal. The town grieved, investigators searched, and the question hung heavy in the air like Missouri humidity. Who could harbor such darkness beneath Brookdale's peaceful surface, and why Emily Carter? The early months following the discovery of Emily Carter's body were a blur of exhaustion, grief, and unanswered questions. Brookdale, once a quiet town defined by school fairs and church picnics, had transformed into a place of whispers and watchful eyes. Everyone wanted justice, but no one knew where to look. Detectives from the Brookdale Sheriff's Department set up a task force within days, transforming the second floor of the precinct into a war room. Maps of the area were pinned to the walls, red strings connecting key locations: Emily's home, the wooded ravine, Daniel Hayes' construction site, the old quarry trail. Coffee cups, files, and evidence bags cluttered every surface. "No stone unturned" became the unofficial motto, though fatigue soon replaced determination. The first person to draw serious attention was Daniel Hayes, Emily's ex-boyfriend. A rugged, soft-spoken contractor in his early 30s, Daniel had dated Emily for nearly 2 years before their quiet breakup 6 months before her death. Neighbors recalled hearing them argue outside her apartment weeks before she vanished, something about trust and moving on. The moment detectives heard that, suspicion ignited. They brought Daniel in for questioning. The interview was long and tense. Detectives pressed him about his whereabouts the night Emily disappeared. He claimed he was working late on a renovation project for a client in nearby Fairview. His co-workers confirmed it, even producing time-stamped receipts for construction materials that matched his story. Still, the police pushed harder. They searched his truck, his home, his work sites, collecting fibers, fingerprints, anything. Nothing matched. He even volunteered for a polygraph, which he passed. When the results came back clean, the investigation's momentum faltered. Daniel wasn't the killer, at least, not on paper. Attention then turned to a mysterious dark pickup truck seen idling near Emily's street the night she vanished. Several neighbors described it black or dark blue, possibly a Ford F-150 with tinted windows, but no one caught the license plate. It was the only unfamiliar vehicle in the area that night, and its appearance felt chillingly deliberate. Detectives scoured traffic cameras, local parking lots, and regional DMV records, searching for matches. Hundreds of trucks fit the description. None led anywhere. Meanwhile, volunteers organized massive search efforts. Residents combed through dense woods, drainage ditches, and abandoned barns. Local fishermen dragged nearby ponds for evidence. The Missouri State Police joined in, bringing cadaver dogs, drones, and specialized forensic teams. Helicopters buzzed over cornfields for weeks, while local businesses donated food and supplies to the search teams. The entire community wanted closure, but every search ended the same way. Nothing new. The phone lines of the sheriff's department rang nonstop. Tip after tip poured in alleged sightings of Emily before her death, people claiming to have overheard confessions in bars, and even anonymous letters mailed from neighboring counties. Detectives followed every lead, driving hours only to find stories that crumbled under scrutiny. The frustration was palpable. As summer turned to fall, the case lost its heat. Media coverage dwindled. Reporters moved on to fresher headlines, leaving behind only occasional updates on the anniversary of her death. Inside the precinct, detectives continued working, but morale had begun to erode. The evidence board grew cluttered with unanswered questions. Brookdale itself changed. Fear became a quiet resident. Parents no longer let their children walk to school. Porch lights stayed on all night. The once bustling Main Street began closing earlier each evening. Conversations at the diner always seemed to circle back to Emily, who could have done it, and whether the killer still lived among them. By the time the first anniversary of Emily Carter's murder approached, the investigation had stalled. The leads were cold, the witnesses silent, and the evidence inconclusive. Yet, deep down, every investigator felt the same haunting suspicion that something vital had been overlooked, something hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to notice. And until they found it, Emily's killer would remain a ghost in Brookdale. By early 2006, nearly 2 years after Emily Carter's murder, the once-burning investigation had faded into a chilling silence. The whiteboards that once displayed maps, photos, and leads had been wiped clean. The task force, once bustling with energy and determination, was quietly disbanded. Detectives were reassigned to new cases, and the Brookdale Police Department returned to its normal rhythm, though nothing in town felt normal anymore. The case file, thick with reports, photographs, and transcripts, was placed into a heavy cardboard box marked Carter, Emily Homicide, 2004, and filed away in the department's evidence storage. Inside, sealed plastic bags held the remnants of a tragedy. Strands of hair, fragments of fabric, soil samples, and photographs taken under the harsh glare of floodlights in that wooded ravine. None of it had been enough. For Emily's family, time did not dull the pain, it only deepened it. Her parents, Linda and Mark Carter, visited her grave every Sunday without fail, often leaving fresh lilacs, her favorite flower. Her mother would straighten the framed photo on the headstone, Emily smiling in her classroom, chalk dust on her hands, and whisper prayers for peace and justice. Her father, once a quiet man, began speaking at local schools about safety and awareness. Evil, he would tell students, doesn't always wear a face you recognize. In 2005, the Brookdale Elementary School, where Emily had taught 3rd grade, started an annual scholarship in her name, the Emily Carter Memorial Award for Future Educators. Each spring, a deserving student would receive it, their name read aloud in the gymnasium where Emily once handed out gold stars and hugs. The ceremony became both a tribute and a wound, a reminder of a life cut short, but not forgotten. Meanwhile, the police department struggled with the weight of failure. Detectives who had once lived and breathed the Carter case spoke of it in hushed tones. Some retired early, unable to shake the frustration of knowing they'd come so close yet still miss something. Rumors began to swirl through Brookdale. Some claimed the killer had moved away. Others whispered darker theories that he was still among them, living an ordinary life, blending in, attending the same grocery stores and Sunday services as everyone else. Each April, as the anniversary approached, local newspapers reprinted Emily's photo, the same one from her classroom, with her warm, genuine smile. Still no arrest in teacher's murder. The headline would read, always followed by the same plea for information. People glanced at it, shook their heads, and turned the page, though the guilt of forgetting weighed heavy on some. Behind the scenes, the physical evidence from the case sat locked in an aging metal cabinet. Dust settled on the boxes, and the once active investigation became just another cold case number in the archives. Yet, not everyone was willing to let it fade away. Detective Ryan Holloway, who had joined the Brookdale Police Department in the early 2000s, refused to close the door on Emily's case completely. He had been a junior investigator back then, quiet, methodical, and deeply affected by what he'd seen. Though years had passed, Holloway kept a copy of Emily's file in his home office, revisiting it every few months. He believed that someday technology would catch up, that science might find what human eyes had missed. In 2006, forensic testing was still limited. DNA analysis required larger, purer samples than the degraded evidence could provide. Fingerprints lifted from Emily's car were smudged and partial. Fibers found at the scene offered no clear source. Every piece of evidence had been tested and retested, only to yield nothing definitive. But Holloway was patient. He often told colleagues, "Time doesn't erase evidence, it just waits for the right tools." Brookdale moved on, at least outwardly. New families arrived, businesses reopened, and life crept back into the quiet streets. Yet those who had lived through that dark spring never truly forgot. For them, Emily Carter wasn't just a headline or a tragedy. She was a daughter, a teacher, a friend. And while the world around her memory grew quieter, deep in a forgotten storage unit on the edge of town, the evidence still waited silent, but not gone. Because sometimes the passage of time doesn't bury the truth. It preserves it. Nearly 2 decades had passed since Emily Carter's murder. The once bustling classrooms of Brookdale Elementary had long been repainted, her students grown into adults, and the small Missouri town had tucked the memory of 2004 into its collective subconscious. But in 2023, a quiet revolution was sweeping through Missouri's cold case division, one powered not by hunches or witnesses, but by science. That year, state investigators launched a new initiative aimed at re-examining unsolved homicides through the lens of modern forensics. DNA technology had advanced far beyond what was possible in 2004. Trace evidence once deemed too degraded could now be amplified and analyzed through next-generation sequencing. It meant that every fiber, every speck of dust, every microscopic cell collected decades ago could suddenly speak if someone cared enough to listen. Detective Ryan Holloway, now a seasoned investigator, had waited years for this moment. He personally requested that Emily Carter's evidence be pulled from storage. The box was retrieved from a back shelf in a dimly lit evidence room, still marked with the faded label, Carter, Emily, 2004. Inside, each item remained sealed, preserved in the same condition it had been left in years earlier. Among them was a single fingernail scraping collected from Emily's right-hand, a detail once thought insignificant. Holloway contacted the state lab in Jefferson City, requesting that the samples be reanalyzed using advanced touch DNA testing and forensic genealogy mapping. Weeks passed in silence. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, his phone rang. It was the forensic analyst, and her voice trembled with excitement. "Ryan," she said, "we got a hit." The new analysis had produced a partial male DNA profile from beneath Emily's fingernails, a match that had never appeared in earlier databases. This time, The genetic code matched an unknown male profile listed in CODIS, the National DNA Index. But the real breakthrough came when forensic genealogists entered that partial DNA into a public genealogy network, building family trees from distant relatives who had voluntarily uploaded their DNA to ancestry databases. Over weeks, scientists meticulously constructed a web of connections, second cousins, great uncles, distant branches of a family tree scattered across the Midwest. Through process of elimination, one name surfaced again and again: Michael R. Benson. The name sent a ripple through the investigative team. Benson had once lived in Brookdale, less than 2 miles from Emily's home. He was 24 at the time of her murder, young, quiet, with no major criminal record beyond minor misdemeanors and a trespassing citation. According to old employment records, he had worked as a local handyman, taking small repair jobs around town. Detectives began retracing his life. Benson had moved out of Brookdale in the summer of 2004, just weeks after Emily's death. He relocated to southern Arkansas, changed jobs frequently, and never stayed in one place for long. He had no social media, no close family ties, and no reason anyone could recall for his abrupt departure. When investigators pulled his name through state databases, they discovered something else: work invoices showing that Benson had completed a minor fence repair at Emily Carter's home just 3 weeks before her disappearance. Detective Holloway froze at the sight of the document. 19 years of silence, and now, a name from the past had reemerged like a ghost. Still, Holloway knew DNA was not a confession. It was a clue, a whisper, not a shout. They needed more: corroboration, motive, a trail connecting Benson's movements to that fateful April day. The team quietly reopened Emily's file under a new classification: active homicide investigation. They cross-referenced old phone records, re-interviewed former witnesses, and studied maps of cell tower data from 2004. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to align. Benson's name wasn't just a coincidence. It was the long-awaited thread pulling the truth out of 2 decades of darkness. But if Benson was indeed the man behind Emily Carter's murder after all these years, how would they find him now? And more importantly, would justice finally catch up? It was a cold January morning in 2024 when the quiet of a Jefferson City neighborhood was broken by the sound of police radios and the soft crunch of boots on frost. After nearly 2 decades of searching, investigators from the Missouri Cold Case Division finally stood outside a small, beige bungalow on the outskirts of town. The name on the mailbox read Michael R. Benson, the man whose DNA had matched the sample from beneath Emily Carter's fingernails. Detective Ryan Holloway waited on the porch, heart pounding. Inside, Benson was just beginning his day, coffee brewing, local news humming faintly from the television. When the knock came, he opened the door without hesitation. "Michael Benson?" one officer asked. He nodded. "You're under arrest for the murder of Emily Carter." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Benson's face drained of color. "That was 20 years ago," he muttered, almost to himself, as handcuffs clicked into place. The arrest was filmed on body cameras. Within hours, word spread like wildfire through Brookdale and beyond. The local news headline read, "Missouri 2004 cold case solved, arrest shocks community." For residents who had long given up hope, it felt surreal. The man accused of killing their beloved teacher wasn't some nameless drifter. He had once lived among them, worked in their homes, smiled in passing. Detectives first broke the news to Emily's parents. Her mother, Linda Carter, wept softly, clutching the framed photo of her daughter she kept by the window. Her father, Robert, could only whisper through trembling lips, "We never gave up." For them, the phone call brought both closure and pain. The wound of loss reopened, but now with the promise of justice. That evening, Brookdale's local paper published a special edition. Neighbors called one another in disbelief, revisiting memories of the man now accused. Some remembered Benson as polite and quiet, a young handyman who kept to himself. Others recalled a darker side: quick temper, sudden mood swings, and odd disappearances around the time Emily went missing. Police confirmed Benson had lived barely 2 miles from Emily's home in 2004 and had completed small repair jobs for several residents in her neighborhood. After her murder, he vanished from town without notice. Now, nearly 20 years later, his past had finally caught up. During his initial interrogation, Benson remained calm, speaking little. "I didn't do this," he said flatly, staring at the table. When detectives confronted him with the DNA evidence, he fell silent. His lawyer later issued a brief statement claiming there had been a tragic misunderstanding and that they intended to challenge the validity of the forensic methods. But behind the scenes, investigators knew the DNA match was airtight, a 1 in a billion probability. The community's emotions were mixed: grief, relief, disbelief. Candlelight vigils were held again for Emily, this time not in mourning, but in remembrance. Her former students, now adults, shared memories online: her kindness, her laughter, the way she made learning feel safe. Social media filled with tributes. Justice for Miss Carter finally. Detective Holloway stood outside the courthouse days later, watching as Benson was led in, handcuffed, wearing a plain gray sweatshirt. Reporters shouted questions. He gave no answer, his gaze fixed on the ground. To the public, he looked like any other aging man, ordinary, unremarkable. Yet beneath that quiet exterior, the evidence suggested the hidden face of violence. For the first time in 2 decades, the name Emily Carter was no longer followed by the word unsolved. The case that haunted Missouri had finally turned a corner. But as the courtroom lights awaited the start of trial, one question still lingered in every heart. Would the truth, after all these years, finally be proven beyond a reasonable doubt? By autumn of 2024, nearly every major news outlet in Missouri had a reporter assigned to Jefferson County Courthouse. What began as a local tragedy 2 decades earlier had become one of the state's most closely followed cold case trials. State of Missouri versus Michael R. Benson. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with the weight of long-delayed justice. From the moment the jury was seated, the prosecution made their message clear. This case was built on time, truth, and science. The district attorney stood before the 12 jurors and began. For 20 years, Emily Carter's voice was silent. Today, through evidence and persistence, she finally speaks again. The prosecution meticulously reconstructed the events of April 17, 2004. Using a timeline built from DNA, cell records, and witness accounts, they argued that Benson had gone to Emily's home that evening, possibly under the pretense of offering to fix her fence again. An argument ensued, perhaps over money or rejection. It escalated quickly, they said, into violence. Forensic specialists explained how microscopic traces of Benson's skin cells were found beneath Emily's fingernails, evidence of a desperate struggle. The defense countered forcefully. They claimed the DNA was too small, too old, too uncertain. They alleged contamination in the evidence chain, suggesting that Benson's prior repair work at Emily's house could have resulted in an innocent DNA transfer. Their attorney argued passionately that prosecutors were building a case on the back of 20-year-old dust. Emily's parents, Robert and Linda Carter, attended every hearing. They sat in the same front row each day, clutching tissues in each other's hands. When forensic photos appeared on the courtroom screens, Linda turned away, tears streaming down her face. Still, she refused to leave. She had promised her daughter that she would see this through. Witness after witness took the stand: former detectives, forensic analysts, old neighbors who recalled Benson's sudden disappearance after the murder. One neighbor remembered seeing his truck parked near the wooded area where Emily's body was later found. Another recalled how Benson had mentioned moving to get a fresh start. Each testimony tightened the noose of evidence around him. When Benson himself took the stand, the room fell silent. He looked older, thinner, his gray hair framing a face that betrayed little emotion. Under oath, he denied killing Emily. He claimed their interactions were brief, a few words exchanged during repair visits. "I barely knew her," he said. "I didn't hurt anyone." But the prosecution was ready. They revealed new evidence, a digital reconstruction of 2004 phone tower data, showing Benson's phone pinging near Emily's home the night she disappeared, contradicting his earlier claim that he'd been out of town. Then came the clincher, a lab expert testifying that the DNA found under Emily's nails had a 1 in 1 billion chance of belonging to anyone other than Benson. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted. Even jurors who had appeared uncertain began taking notes with renewed focus. After 3 weeks of testimony and nearly 20 witnesses, the judge sent the jury to deliberate. The wait felt endless, though in truth it lasted only 6 hours. When the jurors returned, every seat in the gallery was filled with former classmates, townspeople, reporters, all holding their breath. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreperson read, "We find the defendant, Michael R. Benson, guilty." A stillness fell over the courtroom. Emily's mother wept into her husband's shoulder, whispering her daughter's name. The prosecutors exhaled in quiet triumph. Benson sat motionless, eyes fixed on the table before him. Outside, cameras flashed as the verdict spread across Missouri. After 2 decades, Brookdale had its answer and its justice. Yet even as the crowd dispersed, one lingering question hung in the air. What lessons would this small town carry from the darkness it had finally overcome? In the months that followed the verdict, the town of Brookdale began to breathe again slowly, cautiously, like a community waking from a 20-year nightmare. For years, Emily Carter's name had been spoken in hushed tones, always followed by the same word: unsolved. Now, for the first time, people could say her name and mean something else: justice. Emily's parents, Robert and Linda Carter, became symbols of endurance. Their faces had been familiar to everyone in town on missing posters, at vigils, in interviews where hope flickered behind weary eyes. After the trial, they chose quiet over headlines. Yet, even in their silence, their love spoke loudly. Each Sunday, they visited the small memorial garden beside Brookdale Elementary, where a stone plaque bore their daughter's name. Children still placed flowers there every spring, some too young to remember who she was, but old enough to understand that she mattered. "She's teaching again," Robert once said softly during an interview, "just in a different way." To honor her legacy, a local university established the Emily Carter Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to education students who embodied compassion and community service values she had lived every day. The first recipient, a young teacher from Brookdale, dedicated her classroom to Emily's memory, decorating it with sunflowers, Emily's favorite flower. The town itself also changed in more lasting ways. Following the verdict, Missouri lawmakers cited Emily's case in hearings about improving cold case funding and evidence preservation. The decades-long gap between her death and the arrest became a rallying cry for reform. Lawmakers proposed legislation requiring long-term DNA storage and regular retesting of evidence using emerging technologies. One senator remarked, "Justice delayed should never mean justice denied." Detective Ryan Holloway, who had refused to give up on Emily's case, was promoted to lead a new cold case task force, tasked with reviewing other unsolved homicides across the state. Emily's case reminded us that no file is too old, no evidence too small, he said during a press conference. Sometimes, time itself becomes our ally. For Brookdale, the emotional wounds took longer to mend. The once tranquil town that had been scarred by fear and suspicion finally began to rebuild its sense of peace. The annual candlelight vigil in Emily's honor transformed from a symbol of sorrow into one of resilience. Families gathered not to mourn, but to remember the kindness of a teacher who had touched so many lives and to celebrate the power of perseverance. Local media outlets later produced retrospectives on the case, calling it a blueprint for how science and dedication can resurrect truth from the ashes of time. True crime enthusiasts studied it in documentaries and podcasts, emphasizing how the use of forensic genealogy had turned what was once an unsolvable mystery into a model for future investigations. Yet, for those who truly knew her, the victory came with an ache that never fully healed. Robert and Linda still spoke of Emily in the present tense as if she were just out of reach. "Closure," Linda once said in a television interview, "doesn't mean the pain ends. It means you can finally stop running from it." The final lines of her memorial service program, reprinted after the trial, read, Justice is not about time. It's about truth, and truth always finds its way home. Emily Carter's story transcended tragedy. It became a testament to patience, science, and the unyielding love of a family that never stopped believing. Her life, once stolen in silence, continued to teach in ways no classroom ever could. Still, one question lingered quietly in the hearts of those who loved her. What does true justice look like when it arrives 20 years too late?